I never planned to lose everything. My wife, my life, my soul. But in the ruins of my past, I found her. Zasha bound by silent suffering, her innocence masking a pain that matched my own. We played with fire, knowing it could consume us both. When I first took her aboard my broken boat, I knew I was inviting chaos into my life. Every stolen glance, every forbidden touch brought us closer to the edge. Then came the night we couldn't turn back. Now, as I stare into the abyss, I wonder, did I save her, or did I doom us both? I looked into the empty, dark space for almost a full minute before I added some rum to it. At least I waited a whole 5 minutes this time. Not long ago, I might have put rum in my coffee maker instead of water if it could work that way. Well, I actually tried that once. The rum made a big sticky mess in the coffee maker. Plus, it cooked away a lot of the alcohol, so I had to add more rum after all. You learn from your mistakes. I'm called Grease. Everyone in the islands goes by a name different from their real one. My name is Grease, short for Grease Monkey. I fix engines on boats. Or maybe they call me that because my shirts and shorts are always stained. They are far from clean. To be honest, I haven't paid much attention to personal grooming for a few years, so that could be why I got the nickname. I used to care about how I looked. I really did. My real name used to be Thomas Knight. I had it all. It wasn't just given to me. My wife, Lil, and I worked for it. My high school sweetheart, Lily, supported me through college and law school, working hard to put food on our table while I studied. We thought all those long hours would finally pay off. We were on the verge of financial stability and ready to start our family. I imagined making enough money so she could stay home and raise our 3 kids. But that plan changed. At first, we thought Lil was just tired. Then she started having trouble keeping food down. It didn't get better. Ovarian cancer. Once I heard that, things spiraled fast. She was gone in just a few months. For a while, I felt numb. Then the sadness hit me hard. I felt lost and empty. My days turned into a routine: go to work, come home, and stare at the walls, lost in memories. I started drinking more. I thought I could quit any time, but I didn't really want to. I lost my job, my house, my car, and most of my money. I even got into trouble with the law. I had to leave Florida. Even if I tried to turn my life around, it would be hard to get back to where I was. So I decided to forget it. I bought an old boat and set off for the islands. I grew up around boats in Florida and worked on fishing boats throughout high school and college. I was pretty good at fixing things. I dreamed of fixing the boat up and starting a charter business, maybe even having a fleet of boats. I really should have cut back on drinking. After 5 years, my boat was falling apart, and I kept fixing engines just to keep drinking. I hadn't been out of my small space in a year and a half. I stopped cutting my hair and shaving, so I now have a thick, messy beard and a ponytail that's tied back, with a lot of gray strands. So yeah, I'm Grease. Everyone in the islands uses a different name than the one they were born with. There's Pogo, who owns the Shack, a beach bar and grill for people who have served in the military. The walls have a Special Forces logo and a collection of old news articles. Pogo hangs service flags from different military branches from the ceiling. The Shack is where I usually spend my time. They let me stick around because I can help fix their boats, even if I don't fully fit in. They have good food, the music isn't too loud, and it's filled with interesting people. One regular at the Shack is Loud Howard. He's short and has a big personality. You can spot him from quite a distance. Frank Rotuma likes to hang out there to stay away from tourists. We call him Chief because he's the local police chief. It just makes sense, right? Then there's Monster and X. He got the name Monster because of the scars on one side of his face. It looks pretty rough. His eye on that side is mostly white. The iris is cloudy. He's friendly enough, but there's something about him that feels a bit off. X is his partner. I'm not sure why they are still together. It feels less like love and more like a business arrangement. She always seems to be watching him. They are usually together when they are down here, which is about half the year. I heard he's some sort of teacher and she works as a nurse. I can't really imagine what it's like in his classroom. There are many others. Like I said, everyone has their own name. In the slip next to mine, for 2 weeks each month, there's Bobert with a very nice boat. At first, having my old rusty boat next to his seemed to bother him, But then he figured it made his shiny boat look even better. His real name is Robert Sandoval. When he moved in, he tried to say, "Robert, call me Bob," but it ended up as Bobbert by mistake, and it stuck. He's wealthy and a smooth talker, wearing fancy watches. His boat would cost a couple $1,000,000 or more. He's always hustling to make more money. I feel like he'd fit better in New York than here. He isn't really welcome at the shack and spends most of his time in the tourist area. I have no clue where he goes when he leaves the slip. And then there's his wife. The reason I've cut back on my drinking is Zasha. The first time I saw her, I thought I was dreaming. She has long, shiny hair and a tall, thin figure. She usually wears small white shorts and a blue and white striped top. It seems like her go-to outfit. On really hot days, she wears a simple swimsuit when she walks around. And her face? It's as lovely as an angel's. You know the phrase bee-stung lips? She has those. They are truly beautiful. Even with her looks, she has a sense of innocence. Her bright blue eyes always seem amazed by everything around her. She feels like a small-town girl who's untouched by the world's problems. But that's not true. She faces challenges again and again. Sometimes, she wears a long-sleeved shirt to hide signs of a tough life. Sunglasses cover her eyes, maybe to avoid the look she gets. People say she does things she might not want to do, because someone pushes her to make business deals. That's why they call her certain names, quietly behind her back, except for Bobbert. He isn't shy. Bobbert calls her those names right to her face. I've seen her with business people at the bars on the beach. When she's with them, her face shows no joy. Her innocent look turns blank. She doesn't change her expression at all. He watches her with a mean smile, enjoying her discomfort. I couldn't imagine treating someone like he treats Zasha. Zasha seems to be a foreign partner for him, a long-term companion. I shouldn't feel bad for her. She made her choices and knows the rules just like everyone else. She could leave if she wanted to. Frank would help any girl get to the airport and make sure she got a flight home. He had done it for others who really wanted to go. Whatever she is trying to escape must be serious. Still, I had a rule to stay out of other people's lives. Who needs a mechanic meddling in their business? That all changed at the Explorers' Day party at the Reef, a tourist bar decorated with fake palm trees and happy staff. Pogo had to close the shack early for a funeral, so I wandered over to the Reef to relax with a drink or two. I found myself at the table where Bobbert was chatting with a group of tourists, with Zasha sitting a bit away from them. He was going on about how great it is to invest in boats, something I found funny. Having worked with boats my whole life, I know the truth. A boat is just a hole in the water that you pour money into. His next point about boats was even sillier, making me roll my eyes. That's when I caught Zasha looking straight at me. She smiled softly while sipping her drink, but her eyes stayed on me. I had enjoyed a few too many drinks, so I decided to imitate Bobert's exaggerated gestures in a playful way. She picked up a menu to hide her laughter. Then she joined in, mimicking me as well. For the next hour, we exchanged funny expressions, both poking fun at Bobbert. We hadn't even exchanged greetings, but this was the best interaction I had with a woman since losing Lil. From that day on, whenever I saw her, she would catch my glance and, with a playful sparkle in her eyes, start the same game. It felt like we shared a special connection. This became the best part of my days for several months. Just seeing her made me feel happier. I'm not sure when it happened, but I started drinking less. It was a slow process, but I began taking showers more often, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. This led me to fix up the water system on my boat. It meant moving furniture out of storage, and since I had some new pieces, I decided to replace the old ones. Before I knew it, my boat was looking much better. When his boat was in the dock, I spent time at the Reef, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. It was a little silly, really, a light crush on a nice girl. I figured she wouldn't be interested in me. With her work, she probably had her own plans. Plus, Bobbert had more money than I could ever dream of. But still, she inspired me to improve myself. Then, in October, Bobbert surprised us with a suggestion. We were at the Reef one evening when he got a text from one of the waitresses and stepped away to take the call. When he returned, he looked a bit annoyed. "Hey, Grease, how about you take Zasha for a little while?" he said. I noticed Zasha tense up at his words. It was the first time I had seen her respond like this. Bobbert noticed and smirked slightly. Before I could say anything, he added, "Just take her back to your boat for a couple of weeks. Be respectful about it." I've got a business trip to make. I was taken aback for a moment. Are you serious? He nodded, grinning. She'll be fine with it. Just don't go too far. I nodded, feeling unsure. Zasha looked discouraged. Her expression changed, and I could see a sadness in her blue eyes. Bobert gave her a pleased look and left. She walked quietly with me to the boat, her head down. As we slowly made our way up the gangplank, she seemed lost in thought. When I took her to her new cabin and opened the door, she looked uncertain. "Hold on, I need to clear some boxes out and make your bed," I said. She watched closely as I prepared her small room, taking out sheets and a light blanket. "I know it's not perfect, but I've been trying to tidy up. We can clean more tomorrow. The restroom is on the right, and I'm in the cabin to the left. If you need anything, just knock." When I stepped out of her cabin, I looked back. The girl who seemed lost was now gone, and her expression of wonder had returned, a good reward for any effort. The next morning, I woke up early and had coffee brewing. She came out slowly with a shy smile. She sat down and gratefully took the coffee, adding cream and sugar. "I don't have much food. Have you ever been to the shack?" Her answer took a moment to sink in. It was the first time I'd heard her voice, and it was lovely with a slight Russian accent. "No, Robert never took me there. Would you like to try it?" Her smile warmed me. "I would love to." The short walk down the empty beach to the shack was pleasant. I stole glances at her. Even close up, she seemed calm. I held her hand momentarily to help her up the seawall, and it was hard to let go. For a quick moment, it felt like her fingers lingered a bit longer. Pogo's expression darkened when I walked in with her. I helped her to a corner table in the empty bar and went up to order breakfast. His look was serious. "Is Bobert paying you back?" I paused. "What? Oh, no. She's just staying in my spare cabin for a couple of weeks while he's away." He studied my face and then glanced at her. He seemed to come to a conclusion and let it go. We enjoyed pancakes with fruit, and after some initial shyness, we talked about our favorite foods. Time flew by and the bar began to fill up. Loud Howard, followed by Monster and X, came in. Monster didn't react, but X gave a look of disapproval. Pogo noticed and pulled her aside for a brief chat. She seemed to relax afterward. Loud Howard came over, chatting about getting a fuel line fixed on his boat. He had a house on the island. After all, you can't live on a boat forever. Zasha joined the conversation, asking about paint colors and the boat's name. Soon, a group of people gathered around us. I made sure to introduce her as Zasha, and stressed that this is how she should be addressed. X drifted over to talk to Zasha. "So, you're staying with Grease for a couple of weeks?" Zasha smiled wide. "Yes, 2 weeks. He cleared out a cabin for me last night." X shot me a glance to see if I heard that. I nodded. "It was kind of sudden. I used the cabin for storage and had to cover the stuff outside." X looked at me closely. "So what's the plan?" I shrugged. "I don't really have one. Just showing her this side of the beach for now. I had a few tasks to take care of and some work to do on the boat. I thought it would be nice to show her this place, so if she got bored while I was busy, she would have somewhere comfortable to relax. The real reason was that I wanted her to feel welcome and valued." X didn't say anything at that moment, but later I ran into him at the bar while getting some more coffee. "Her own space?" he asked. "It's just for a couple of weeks. I'll put my things back if I need to. I should have the hold ready by then anyway. Listen, I know the story with Bobert and Zasha. When he lends her out, it isn't for just any spare cabin. Are you worried about something happening?" I shook my head. "I don't know the full story, but I will treat her kindly. She's a wonderful person and deserves respect. He just offered her to me for 2 weeks last night without any warning because he is going away. I thought she could use a little break." X looked at me closely and finally said, "Just don't mess this up." When we returned to the table, X talked to Zasha more directly and found out that she only had the clothes she was wearing for the 2 weeks. Before I could speak, X took her away, saying she would help her get some things for my boat by dinner. I spent the rest of the day finishing some repairs, and when I got back to the boat, Zasha was there, looking cheerful. She was tidying up the kitchen area, wearing blue shorts and a t-shirt, her hair in a ponytail, humming happily. As soon as I walked in, she greeted me with a bright smile and told me about her day with X. They had picked out some clothes and explored a bit. The clothes were typical tourist items, and X had taken care of everything, reassuring Zasha not to worry. Still, She seemed a little nervous. X also made it clear that we were invited to dinner at the shack with her and Monster. I wasn't too concerned about X, but I felt a little uneasy about Monster. He was usually distant but somewhat friendly, yet I couldn't shake off my worries around him. Either way, we needed to eat. That evening, I put on a clean shirt and we headed over. It was the most social evening I'd had in a long time, and I hardly drank anything. I didn't want to let Zasha down. We enjoyed music, chatted, and had a good time. Monster turned out to be a better conversationalist than I expected, and even spoke a little Russian. However, when he looked my way, I felt a shiver run through me. Walking back to the boat along the beach was lovely. Zasha gave me a grateful look as she went into her cabin. I promised myself I would make these weeks the best for her. Each day, I worked hard at that. Zasha spent time with X, but also helped me on the boat. One long day, we even refinished the whole deck, and it looked amazing. We grilled on the beach and enjoyed meals at the shack. She quickly became a favorite at the shack, like a bright ray of sunshine. Even though she looked young, she was almost 30 years old and had attended university. However, she usually kept details about her life to herself. For the entire time, I didn't have to see that sad look or blank expression. 3 days before Bobbert was set to return, X handed me a couple of tickets. "The governor's ball dinner and dancing the day after tomorrow. We got some extra tickets, so maybe you and Zasha could go?" I stared at the tickets. They were rare around here. You don't just get extra tickets like that. "I'm not sure I can." She interrupted me. "Monster has a suit that should fit you, and I have some dresses Zasha could wear." That pretty much ended my argument. I nodded, curious about why she offered. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a tear in her eye, but she quickly recovered. "Because I once had something great, and it slipped away." She turned sharply and walked off. I told Zasha about the invitation, and she was overjoyed. The next day, she spent hours picking out a dress with X. When she returned to the boat, she had a lovely light blue dress. "And a pair of scissors," she said playfully. "You have to look your best." I complained a bit, but soon my hair was cut short and my beard was trimmed. I hardly recognized myself in the mirror. The scruffy version was gone, replaced by a man I hadn't seen in years. Zasha looked amazing. She wore just enough makeup to enhance her beauty, and the blue gown accentuated her beautiful eyes. She seemed like an angel, captivating and stunning. The ball was a dream for Zasha. The colonial mansion, with its colorful decor and soft furnishings, felt like it came straight from a fairy tale. She held tight to my arm as we walked in. Photos were taken, and names were called, just like in the movies. I spotted Monster and X dancing. I was a little out of practice, but Zasha moved gracefully. People looked at me with curiosity. I was a familiar face on the docks, but hardly recognized without my beard and long hair. Zasha had been kept away from this kind of event by Bobert's careful guidance. We ended up sitting next to some official guests who tried to chat with Zasha. Still, she kept holding on to my arm. We danced until the last song ended, then made our way back to the boat, feeling as if we were floating. We even stopped for one last dance on the beach under the bright moon, listening to the sound of the waves. That night, there was a gentle knock on my cabin door. Zasha slipped in quietly. In the moonlight from the porthole, I could see her looking beautiful. "Zasha, you really don't have to do this for me," I said softly. She giggled lightly. "Shh. I am doing this for me." A warm feeling surrounded us. What started as gentle soon became an urgent bond between us. We spent the night together, peacefully falling asleep while holding each other. But the next morning, she was gone. Her new clothes were neatly packed in a bag on a shelf, as if she would come back. That evening started with a heavy feeling. I saw her with Bobbert at the reef. As I walked past, she flinched, and my heart sank. Bobbert noticed and gave a sneering smile. "Teaching her a lesson? That's good. She needs to know her place." Anger welled up inside me. I wanted to confront him right then, but at that moment Zasha caught my eye and winked at me. I understood her plan. If Bobbert realized how close we had become, he would have tried to keep me away. With him thinking I had made her uncomfortable, he unintentionally kept us together. For the next 2 months, things stayed the same, even though my heart ached every time I saw Bobbert with Zasha. My anger towards him grew. I couldn't understand why she chose to be with him. Each meeting was painful, and I thought about avoiding places where I might see them together. But if I stayed away completely, it felt like I would be letting Zasha down. It was like a worry that sticks with you. You know it will hurt, but you can't help thinking about it. I wasn't sure how much longer I could handle the situation before I couldn't take it anymore. Then, everything changed unexpectedly. One evening, as I was staring at a bottle of rum at sunset after a long workday, I heard a strange noise. Someone was having trouble starting Bobert's boat engine, clearly not knowing what they were doing. It sounded like they hadn't turned on the fuel. Bobert had his problems, but he knew how to work a boat, and so did Zasha. I grabbed a fish knife and slipped out of my boat to theirs. If they managed to start the boat, it could cause big problems. I jumped from the dock and climbed aboard. If someone was trying to take the boat, my price for helping Bobert would be Zasha's freedom. I moved quietly across the deck and down the stairs. I could hear quiet voices in the engine room as I entered the main cabin. Then I stopped. Bobert was in no position to make deals again. He was tied up by the closet door. I focused my attention carefully, moving cautiously on the slippery floor. My stomach twisted with worry for Zasha and the strange sight in front of me. A low voice from the next cabin caught my ear, deep and threatening. I followed the sound, gripping my knife tightly. A large man with dark hair and tattoos was pulling Zasha, her clothes in disarray and her expression one of defeat, her blue eyes mostly closed. He was speaking in a language I thought was Russian, his tone harsh and threatening. Without thinking, I swung my club down behind his ear with all my strength. He fell, and I quickly pulled him away from her. Zasha had bruises on her face, her eyes nearly shut, and her lips were hurt. As I laid him on the floor, she opened her eyes and looked at me. In that moment, her tough exterior dropped, and she held on to me tightly. She whispered, "There are 3 more. We need to run." We ran away without grabbing anything. My boat was too close, the first place they'd check, so we headed across the beach toward the shack. Halfway there, I looked back and saw the figures chasing us across the sandy beach. I helped her over the seawall, and we stumbled into the shack. The atmosphere changed as everyone turned to see us. Zasha looked hurt, and I was dirty and disheveled. The crowd was shocked, except for Monster, who just glanced our way before going back to his drink. I led Zasha toward the bar and Pogo, hoping to find a place to hide her. "They're right behind us. They just took down Bobert." Pogo looked past me. "And they have guns." He seemed oddly calm. I quickly turned to the entrance. 3 men with short hair and handguns had followed us inside, catching up quicker than I thought. I stood in front of Zasha as they approached with smug grins. Their leader focused on us while the others scanned the bar. Everyone watched them, except Monster, who sat with his back to them, deep in thought. "We're just here for the person who caused trouble earlier." His accent was thick. One of the men pointed toward Frank Rotuma, aiming his gun in that direction. Police uniforms always attract attention. But Frank was unarmed, holding his hands up with fingers spread. I didn't move as the grinning man came closer. Frank looked up at the man in front of him. He spoke calmly, the seriousness clear in his voice. "Don't worry about me, boys. I'm off duty for the next 8 hours." I caught a glimpse of X's face, a small, icy smile forming. In a quiet, cold tone, she whispered, "Monster." I had seen troubling sights before, accidents that left lasting impressions. This was different. I could see Monster's thoughtful expression change, revealing a chilling calmness. He moved smoothly, disarming the man with quick precision. The other 2 were taken care of before they even noticed what was happening. Monster continued with the same strange, steady demeanor. As the last one fell, I caught a glimpse of X's face, a brief mix of bitter pride. Monster's face remained unchanged as he cleared the weapon and set it down. He spoke one word in a deep voice. "Clear." I really didn't want to know what he was thinking, and for a moment, I wondered what he saw through that cloudy eye. Then I felt Zasha's hands on me from behind. I turned and hugged her tightly. The shack was quiet for a moment. Loud Howard spoke up. "Man, Sergeant, if I'd known you'd take this long, I would have made a cup of coffee. I almost dozed off waiting for you." His tone carried a level of authority I hadn't heard before. Monster replied in his usual friendly voice, which I now saw as a bit of an act. "My apologies, Colonel. I had to wait until things settled down." That made sense. He was trying to keep everything calm. X stood up and started checking on Zasha. We need a real checkup, but she's doing better than I thought. She looked at me next. No injuries on this one. Pogo reached under the bar and pulled out a logo t-shirt, offering it to me for Zasha to wear. Once she put it on, she looked at me sincerely. My baby, my Kisa. She quickly explained that Bober had taken her daughter to his house on a small island with a housekeeper and a security guard. That's why Zasha never tried to leave him. She did everything she had to do to protect her child. Frank, looking serious, turned to us. I'm still off duty, but I need to visit that island. X replied, We'll go with you. So I took my boat out for the first time in a year and a half. She seemed to sense our urgency and ran smoothly. Frank knew which small islands belonged to Bobert and found the right one on the charts. On the boat ride, Zasha shared her story. Her husband had been a police officer in St. Petersburg who had crossed paths with the local mafia. Unfortunately, he had been killed, and she was taken as part of a human trafficking deal. At the time, she was 7 months pregnant, which wasn't the usual target, but her husband had upset them. Essentially, she was sold to Bobert. Despite everything, Bobert allowed her to carry her baby, knowing he could use the child to control her. This started a tough time for her. She got to spend 2 weeks a month with her baby, but she had to meet Bobert's demands to do so. From what she knew, the threats started because Bobert had not kept a deal. The same people who brought her to him were involved. It's a risky world, and dealing with such situations can be dangerous. At the house, there was no resistance. The housekeeper and security staff saw Frank and Monster and handed over the 2-year-old girl without hesitation. She was adorable, sharing her mother's bright blue eyes and golden hair. Zasha picked up Kisa and cried openly for the first time. After going through so much pain, Zasha's tears flowed freely. I stood there until X urged me to move closer, and I stepped toward them. Zasha looked at me with tear-filled eyes and found comfort in being near me. By the time we got back to the shack as the sun was rising, I was carrying Kisa while Zasha held onto my arm tightly. When we reached the house, things had changed. The bodies were gone, and Loud Howard and Pogo had just returned from an unexpected fishing trip. Later, we found out that anything connected to Bobert had been cleared away. We weren't sure how much the housekeeper and guard really knew, but they seemed unaware of what had really happened. Frank told them to leave the islands in 2 days, and they nodded to show they understood. Zasha stayed close to my side. Since Bobert had prepared a marriage certificate, she now owned the boat and the small island. She sold both quickly. We were married soon after, and I suggested a prenup because of her new wealth, but she laughed and dismissed the idea. She joked that I was too old to look for another woman and that I would just have to stay with her forever, as if anyone could compete. We have a small house on the island and run a fishing charter with 3 boats. Kisa is growing fast, and her little sister Lily is just starting to walk. Zasha chose that name. Through all her struggles and hardships, Zasha's heart stayed strong. She fought for her daughter, ready to face any challenge for her. For her daughter, she was determined. The only time she had doubts was when I agreed to take care of Kisa for 2 weeks, since Zasha had learned to trust me in her own way. Even with my flaws, I became a better person for her. I turned into the person she needed me to be. Everyone has to have a name here, but people don't use that name anymore. They simply call her what she truly is. They call her Angel. Chapter: The Shack. A Story of Friendship. Live with wolves and you'll learn how to howl. Russian proverb. We want a story! 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 3 little girls with blonde hair called out to me from their beds. I leaned back in the rocking chair and pretended to have an accent. Do you want We Must Find Moose and Squirrel? No! That made Kisa and Lily giggle loudly. Amber, our youngest, laughed too, mostly because her sisters were laughing. She had never even seen the show, so she didn't understand my funny voice. Kisa is named after me in a way. Kisa means kitten, which was a name my first husband called me. I named her that so I would always remember him. Lily is named after Thomas's first wife, a woman I care for even though we never met. Amber's name was suggested by Spooky in a soft voice. I'm sure it means something special, but she hasn't told us. Thomas and I think it is a lovely name. The Wolf Story, The Wolf Story. That's their favorite. It's a long tale and sometimes it can be a bit sad, but they adore it. Maybe because I love it too. I glanced at the dresser. The pictures of Piotr and Lillian seemed to nod at me approvingly. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful dog with shiny golden fur, a fluffy tail, lovely ears, and perfect teeth. She was cheerful and wanted to make everyone around her happy, even though she was a bit vain. One day, she met a brave and honest police dog. She admired his honesty and wanted to share joy with him. They decided to live together happily, hoping for a family of puppies someday. Now, let me tell you about a cheerful and pretty university student who met and married a detective in the St. Petersburg police. It all began when I slipped on some gray winter ice while entering a coffee shop. I loved winter, the cold and the joy of walking on snowy streets, sipping hot coffee. Just as I started to step inside, the ice slipped beneath me and I began to fall. Someone caught my arm and helped me stand again, but I slipped once more, grabbing onto a pair of broad shoulders. His warmth made me smile. He had bright gray eyes and light brown hair, and his friendly manner was refreshing. "Careful! We can't have pretty girls slipping on the ice. It might give the city a bad reputation." I was used to compliments, but his kind words made my cheeks flush. "I can't find my balance." His smile made me chuckle, and I held on a bit tighter to steady myself. His grin widened as he kept me steady. "I should probably say something smart, but I think I'll just stand here and let you hold on to me for as long as you want." And I did. At that moment, I decided to hold on to Piotr forever. It might sound silly, but I felt that we would share laughter, build a family, and grow old together. There was no way he could escape from me. I was determined and knew what to do. The girl at the coffee shop told me his name and the police station where he worked. The next day, I showed up at his department with lunch and brought a calendar. I said we needed to pick a wedding date. He laughed. "I don't even know your name. How do you know we're a good match?" "Because you told me I could hang on for as long as I wanted, and I've chosen the rest of our lives. I don't get a choice in this." "You get one chance. We'll go out for 2 months. If you want to stop after that, we can. If not, we're together forever." "Why would I agree to this?" "Because you said I'm pretty. And pretty girls get everything they want?" "This pretty girl only wants one thing. I've heard to be careful of pretty girls. They can cause trouble. I'll wear a mask for the rest of my life. You can be the only one who ever sees my true self." He looked at me closely. "You mean it?" "I've never chased after a guy in my life before today." He agreed. I can't explain how I knew it would work out, but it did. And it was everything I had ever hoped for, like living a fairy tale. 2 months went by, then 3, then 4. In 6 months, we were married. We wanted a big family and planned to start as soon as I finished school. The only problem at our wedding wasn't between us, but rather with Piotr and his cousin Dmitri, who was quite powerful. Piotr, usually calm even in tough situations, knocked his cousin out in the church entrance. When I asked about it, he simply said his cousin wouldn't be welcome in our home. Seeing them happy, an unhappy soul who hated joy sent awful creatures to punish them for being honest and joyful. They tried to bring the police dog to join them, but he was too noble for that. So the creatures targeted the 2 dogs. There were just too many, and while they fought bravely, in the end, they overpowered the police dog and took the beautiful dog away. Piotr and I had been married for 10 months. I had graduated from my language studies and was working part-time as an interpreter at the local telecommunication office. 7 months pregnant and happier than I ever thought possible. Piotr's main worry was his family. His parents had died in a car accident, but he had an uncle named Gregor Ivanovich, who was wealthy and respected. But he always treated me in a strange, condescending manner. I thought his views were shaped by his time and how he saw women. I learned differently later. To him, women were like things you could trade, valued only for what they could provide. Gregor ran a big criminal operation, moving many goods that people desired because of greed. Piotr wanted no part of it, and his uncle promised to keep him out of it all. One thing Piotr asked his uncle for as a wedding gift was that he would never harm me. However, promises from such people can often be misleading. I was in the kitchen when I heard shouting at the front door. I stepped out, my pregnancy making it a little hard to move, even though Piotr said I looked more beautiful than ever. "Even if I wanted to, it's too late for that," I heard Piotr say. "The proof has already been taken." Gregor's calm voice replied, "You'll have to get it back, won't you?" It doesn't work that way, and you know it. You'll need one of your judges to help with this. As I turned the corner, strong hands grabbed me. Piotr! He looked at me, and I noticed there were 6 men in the room. Dmitri laughed softly. Maybe he needs to see his wife with a real man. Maybe that will make him pay more attention to family. Piotr glared at him, then turned his anger to Gregor. You promised you wouldn't let her get hurt. Gregor smiled. I did. I felt Dmitri begin to loosen his grip, but Gregor's face turned serious. But treating women as they are meant to be treated isn't harm. I struggled to break free as Dmitri held me tight. Piotr pushed one man away. When he moved, I saw him pull something out. His first attempt hit the man he shoved, and he turned to face me, ready to protect me. I stood as still as I could. But he didn't succeed. Another loud sound rang out just as he fired again, and his head twisted to the side. Piotr's last shot, instead of hitting me, struck Dmitri. He couldn't keep me entirely safe, but at least Dmitri was no longer holding me. I began to scream, and in some ways that sound would stay with me for years. The trolls treated her very poorly, taking her far into the woods where they forced her to make a deal with a wicked creature, one they knew would be even worse, giving her dark magic meant for the terrible Troll King. Even with all her struggles, she had one little puppy, a puppy so lovely that even the wicked creature was amazed by it. Still, he kept the puppy from her most of the time and neglected it, knowing that she felt trapped and believed that no loyal dog would ever leave its owner. The slimy creature, angry at her beauty, made her live in mud and stay dirty. She felt very sad but realized that the creature thrived on her sorrow, so she hid her sadness from it. Robert Sandoval was my new owner. Even though we were called husband and wife, he treated me worse than the men before him. While they saw me as an object, he looked for ways to humiliate me. It wasn't just physical. He took joy in making me entertain others to show his power over me. His ways were harsh. I was locked in a dirty, hot shipping container, feeling unwell and anxious. I went into labor and gave birth all alone, surrounded by pain and darkness. But when my baby cried, I felt a new strength. I knew I had to survive for my child. I heard my great-grandfather's voice in my head, reminding me that true strength can overcome great suffering. Robert saw my love for Kisa as a weakness to use against me. As long as I worked to protect my baby, I understood that I could handle anything he threw my way. A mother should never be ashamed of doing everything she can for her child. I could endure. Each day, a loyal dog, filled with love for her puppy, watched the woods, silently hoping someone might rescue her. But all she saw were more monsters hiding in the shadows, and, in the dark, the shining yellow eyes of wolves. She feared the wolves even more than the other creatures, having heard they lacked honor and kindness. Their eerie howls frightened her deeply. At first, I didn't notice the strange men who kept to themselves away from the busy tourist spots. But over time, I began to see them among the crowds. They seemed tough and cold, like my great-grandfather, who had faced terrible things during the war. But unlike him, these men had no warmth or kindness. The tall man with white hair and the shorter bald man looked at Robert and me with complete indifference. They did not care about our plight. I sensed that Robert feared them, perhaps more than I did. The scariest were the half-demon man and his companion. She looked at me with disdain, and his one clear eye seemed to hold a dark understanding. Sometimes I had uneasy thoughts about them. Every day she looked into the woods, feeling her hope fade and her spirits drop, hiding her sadness from the creature nearby. Until one day she noticed a pair of bright yellow eyes watching her back. Day after day the eyes came closer, shining brighter until she realized it was a thin, scruffy wolf, the least scary of all. He looked sad and lonely. He inched closer to her every day until he sat right across from her, just out of sight. She still felt nervous about wolves, but he seemed gentle and a bit silly. He rolled around and played, making her smile. Despite only having this thin, goofy wolf and the memory of her puppy for company, she felt less alone. He was a very thin man, dirty, with messy hair and a scruffy beard. It was clear he was having a hard time in life, something she had seen many times before. But he looked at her the way Piotr had, as if she was the only beautiful thing in the world. At first she felt unsure, but then she saw he didn't see her like others did. He saw her as a real person. He did something surprising. He noticed she didn't like Robert and started to make funny comments about him, making her laugh. Laughter can change how we feel, making problems seem smaller. His humor seemed to lift some of the weight Robert had on her heart, making her feel lighter. Robert didn't notice the change in the man he called Grease. He was unaware that Grease was starting to clean up his life. It took her time to see it too, but he was getting healthier and drinking less every day. She was amazed. She had never seen someone overcome such troubles before. Slowly, her feelings about him began to change without her realizing it. And when Robert finally stopped holding on to her, Grease treated her with kindness in a way she had never felt before. So she let herself trust him. For the first time since Piotr, she was with someone she truly liked. He introduced her to others in his unique group. They welcomed her in their own special way. Leaving Thomas to go back to Robert was one of the hardest things she ever had to do. She knew it was tough for Thomas, but she had to think about Kisa's safety. She needed to stay strong. She tried to share her feelings with him, but she could see his hurt, a hurt that mirrored hers, and she began to wonder if there was a way to escape with him and her Kisa. One day, the ogres returned for the box of dark magic. The ogres were quite mean, and they decided to take more of the slime creature's treasures too. There was a big fight, and the ogres won against the slime monster. They were so angry that the dog still had some joy that they wanted to hurt her and her puppy. Just then, the thin, tattered wolf rushed into the hut and revealed himself as a brave prince of wolves. He faced the strongest ogre and defeated him with great courage. Then he called his pack to chase away the remaining ogres and save her puppy. Chance can be unpredictable. Dmitri and his men showed up suddenly. I didn't know what he wanted with Robert. I was stuck in a closet while they dealt with him, and after I saw what happened, I was relieved. Even though I had my problems with Robert, their actions didn't make sense to me. Dmitri warned me I might end up like him, but then my Thomas stepped in. One moment I felt hopeless, and the next, Dmitri was gone, and I was running away with Thomas. Dmitri's men followed us but fell into a trap without realizing it. When Kisa and I were hugged by Thomas, I felt I had everything I needed. I belonged with him and his friends. After he took us to his boat, I saw him pour all the alcohol into the sea, and I knew he was doing it for us. Surrounded by wolves, she held tight to Thomas and her puppy, feeling nervous about the other wolves. The wolves noticed her unease and led her to the edge of a sparkling pond under the moonlight, smiling at her. One of them said, "Look in the water, lovely one. What do you see?" The dog gazed into the clear water and saw her reflection. The dirt and grime had washed away. Her shiny golden coat was still there, but her ears stood tall. Her teeth looked strong. Her eyes sparkled with life. She raised her face to the sky and howled long and loud. She realized the truth. She was a wolf like them, and she always had been. What she thought were sad howls were actually calls of friendship. She felt truly at home. She would stay with them forever and begin a new life with her brave prince of wolves. I started to get up to leave the room. Kisa gave me a serious look. "Stop! What about the Troll King? He's mean and he can't escape. What about the magical box?" Lily and Amber looked just like their older sister, sharing the same worried expression. I sat back down, unable to hold back my smile. "Are you sure?" "It's getting late, and I'm getting tired." I stretched and yawned, feeling it was true. "Mommy, tell the whole story." I smiled. We did this every time. "Okay, if you're sure." The wolf pack grew as other wolves joined them, drawn to their true and strong spirit, and they lived in peace and harmony in their forest. But while the wolves were happy in their peace, the Troll King was not. He sent more creatures to capture the golden wolf and her sweet puppies, and to get the magical box. But the wolves were wise and alert, and they saw the intruders sneaking into their territory. They protected themselves and found the troublesome box. For years, everything was wonderful. Thomas and I understood each other in a way I never expected. We had both felt the heartache of losing our first loves, and we decided to honor those memories by keeping their photos in our home. Every time I left the house, I touched Lillian's picture and promised silently to look after Thomas and our children. Our little family kept growing. Some joined us willingly, like Spooky, while others, like Evelyn, were not so welcome. Danny, Monster's daughter, became my closest friend. I tried to forget about Gregor, even though it hurt that Piotr would never be given justice. but I learned that some things were just not meant to happen. One calm night, well after dark, Thomas and I sat with Pogo, Howard, and Chief. Pogo tapped his fingers on the table. "We might have a situation." Wendy called. I had never met Wendy, but I knew she was a costly smuggler. Pogo continued, "Someone is looking for transport in 3 weeks. 6 men will be guarding a large shipment that didn't get checked." "Is it coming here?" Howard asked, raising his brow. "That's the odd part. It's leaving from here, going to Sudan." "That doesn't make sense," Howard replied. "Exactly. That's why Wendy called. She wanted to check if it was us using a Russian identity." "Russian?" Chief turned his gaze to me. Pogo nodded. "That's what she said. I don't like it. Whatever is going on must be arriving by ship or plane." Thomas tightened his grip on my hand. "Or maybe it's already here. Bobbert might have hidden something on one of the smaller islands." Howard looked thoughtful. "Maybe something like certain kinds of military gear," he said, glancing at me. "Things that could fetch a lot of money from rare buyers. But even with a family discount, I'm not sure if it would cover Wendy's costs." Chief frowned. "If something goes wrong and a shipment gets traced back here, it could lead to real trouble. This might even involve a commercial flight." A pained look crossed Howard's face. "Grease, you and Angel need to make a list of every place where Boebert might have hidden something, likely something quite large." I shook my head. "I was only with Robert for about 2 weeks each month. He could have stored things anywhere when I wasn't around. The only place I ever stayed was at the house on Comey Key." "Who did you sell the key to?" Howard asked. "Wing Ho Development. I think they just bought a bunch of small islands for investment. They don't seem to have done anything with it." "I hope it's not a cover for something else. I'm going to ask Evie to find a way to buy that island back through one of her other businesses, just in case. We made nearly $7 million from the sale of the island, but for Evie, that was like a regular person buying a candy bar. Even if it wasn't easy, she'd do it for Howard." Chief opened his notebook and pulled out a chart that showed the key. There wasn't much space to hide a container around here, just the house and a couple of small beaches. I told my team to keep an eye out for visitors. 6 people shouldn't be hard to notice. It was almost 3 weeks when they finally arrived. I noticed it was serious when I got to the shack and saw Chief looking unusually tense. He rarely showed stress like this. Howard and Pogo looked worried. "They arrived this morning. Spooky has been watching them all day. They're looking for you, Angel. They have a couple of old pictures, ones of you and Bobbert." I felt a wave of panic. "Thomas is out on a charter and the girls are at school." Pogo smiled gently. "You're worried about Thomas and the girls first? That's why we care about you, Angel. Monster went to pick up the girls from school and Chief called Grease to send a police boat to keep an eye on them. They must not realize we're here. Anyone truly suspicious wouldn't be so careless," Howard said, looking puzzled. Pogo shrugged. "They're probably just Bobert's old friends trying to finish up some loose ends. They might not believe Bobbert died and could think he's involved in something more." "That doesn't sit right, and we still don't know about the shipment," Howard said as he scanned the table, trying to piece things together. "We'll need to ask them more directly. We could find out what they want, and someone could tell them where Angel lives to see how they react," Pogo suggested. "Make sure Monster knows we need one of them alive." I understood Howard's worries. Monster was always quick to protect the children. Chief shook his head. "I need to stay out of this. Some things are better left unsaid." His voice faded as he spoke. They arrived that night. Only Thomas and I were in the house trying to keep things normal. But the 6 people wouldn't come inside. Pogo and Monster were waiting outside, ready for anything. I trusted Monster to handle the situation. Thomas and I didn't hear a thing, but around midnight, Pogo and Howard came in. "We need to deal with those 6 people tonight. This is definitely linked to something Bobbert had hidden. The one person we spoke to didn't know what it was, just that they had to collect it from the house. He really had no idea, and he would have told us if he did." Pogo wouldn't meet my eyes. They were supposed to find out if Angel knew anything and take care of it. A chill ran down my spine. I was aware of how they questioned people, how they had treated Bobbert. I guessed Monster wouldn't be any softer with the one person who might still be alive, and I didn't feel sorry for that at all. Howard said, "It must be the house at the Key. We'll need to check it out in the morning. I'll inform Evie. As we finished checking the rooms on the first floor, Pogo glanced at me. What's in the basement? I asked. I pointed to the stairs leading up. Kisa and I were up there. I never went to the basement, and after everything, I just wanted to leave. I didn't want anything that belonged to Robert. Pogo? I heard Spooky's voice from downstairs. She must have sneaked down while everyone was looking around on the ground floor. There's a big hollow spot in one of the walls. Pogo and Thomas grabbed sledgehammers from the boat and went down. The wolves came together around the box. They realized the magic inside was so dark that they could not stay quiet and ignore the evil Troll King. But even though their pack was larger, they still needed help to fight him. They gathered on a hill in the forest and began to howl, calling for other wolves. I felt a shiver. Pogo's voice sounded very serious. I had never seen him really angry or upset before. Is that what I think it is? Chief asked as he looked through the hole in the wall. They must be out of their minds. Howard sat quietly for a moment, then repeated what Pogo said. Why couldn't it have been something else? My Thomas gazed at the strange barrel-shaped object. I think I know, but what exactly is it? Pogo shook his head, trying to understand. It's a Mad M, a Russian version, probably stolen somewhere along the way. A medium atomic demolition munition. Its power could be as great as the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and it might release a lot of harmful materials. Don't touch it. It might not be armed, but items like this are usually handled carefully. It could cause a big mess. Howard nodded. I'm going to use the satellite phone from the boat. We need to bring in Maria and Donna. Grease, I need you to Radio X. Ask her to send Monster here. Tell her to grab the 2 footlockers in the supply room marked water pump parts. There are some serious tools in those, and I would feel safer with them here. The next few hours were busy. Black wolves of the night, strong gray wolves of the mountains, and even dark red wolves from the Troll's kingdom came together. They held a meeting under the moon and agreed that the troll was a big danger to all. It took almost 2 days for Donna to arrive, and she brought a whole group with her. It took all 3 of our boats to bring her team to the island. She arrived with 40 heavily armed men who changed into uniforms during the trip. Pogo was waiting on the dock when we got there. Tell your men to stay out of the house. She gave him a fierce look. If what you say is true, we need to secure it right away. There's a strong presence in there with Howard, Donna. He's ready and not in a friendly mood. This is too close to home, too close to the kids. They might be able to deal with him eventually, but it wouldn't be wise and could endanger many lives. We don't want that. I get it, Donna said, waving to one of the men. Secure the island, but keep everyone away from the house unless I say so. Her team quickly moved to surround the area, but 4 men stayed with her. You should think about a different plan, Paz. One day you might lose control. Who would take his place? Donna frowned. What are you up to? Nothing. We found a serious problem nearby, and we want to prevent any rash actions. This situation is tricky, but it's not careless. We'll handle it. I just want everyone here first. Maria is coming, and she's bringing a few guests. Who are they? Pogo shrugged. Not sure, but I hope one of them can help us deal with the threat. Pogo and Howard had filled me in more. This was why I decided to stay while Thomas took the Sea Angel back to make some changes. I felt uneasy at the thought of being apart from him, even for a little while. Donna looked out at the ocean with a serious expression. I had to rely on Wendy to get here. It cost a lot, but it was necessary. It's not your money, Donna, and she does a great job. You want to move a group of soldiers and their equipment halfway across the world quickly and quietly? Nobody will hear a thing from her. Still annoying? Pogo smiled. I spent my childhood learning how to get a rise out of you. This is a win for me, he said, making a checkmark gesture in the air with his finger. You're still a pain. But she gave her brother a small smile before turning to me. Angel, if you have more kids, keep having girls. Little brothers can be quite the challenge. Maria Hawthorne, the deputy director of the FBI, arrived with her guests. A tall, groomed man who clearly held authority, and an older man in a simple suit who looked weary. Donna greeted Maria with a nod, then turned and walked toward the taller man with a warm smile. Yuri, I figured you would get involved. He shook his head and laughed softly. Danica, I knew you'd be here when I saw the Russian uniforms on American soldiers. How do you always show up when there's trouble? It's part of our work, Yuri. She glanced back at Maria. Good choice. He can make decisions and only answers to one person. Maria smiled politely. I'm glad you both know each other, but let's catch up later. I think we need to understand what we're facing. Maria introduced everyone, and we waited in the living room until the older man, Alexei, came back down the stairs looking pale. I assisted with translating for him since Howard wanted to make sure everything was clear. He says it's safe now. The device wasn't activated, but everything was in place and the trap was ready. It was strong enough to destroy the house and scatter the core. Maria shook her head. How many of these things are out there, Yuri? We don't know. It was a special program with very limited access, and the records were destroyed in the 90s. This is a remnant of the Cold War. As far as I know, Alexei is the last person involved, and he was just a technician. He didn't even know the full details. Unfortunately, I have to bring him out of retirement, but he'll be paid fairly. Donna glanced at the stairs leading to the basement. We need to be part of this, Yuri. It was your issue when it was in Russia, but now it's everyone's problem. At the very least, Maria needs to be kept in the loop. We can do better. President Putin is very protective of our land, but I spoke with him before I left. He thinks that keeping information from you could damage the trust we have left, especially if something is missed. I've been authorized to share everything we know, which, sadly, isn't much more than what we've already discussed. He frowned. We might have to negotiate with Gregor Ivanovich to get the information we need to prevent more problems. I couldn't believe it. After everything, my Pyotr would not be avenged. I felt a deep anger rise within me. No. My voice didn't sound like mine. He looked over at me, really seeing me for the first time. Maybe he thought I was just there to translate. I continued. No, Gregor Ivanovich will pay for this and for the loss of my husband. Young lady. He spoke down to me as if I were a child. Don't even try it. I know you can make him talk if you want to. We don't do things like that anymore. I laughed, but it sounded empty. Don't tell me what people will and won't do. Pyotr deserves justice. If you won't make that happen, I will. I'm not helpless or alone anymore. Howard leaned forward, his face unreadable. We're her family now. We'll get to him. After what he did, there will be consequences. Howard understood revenge. It had driven his life. He had spent over 30 years going after everyone connected to the tragedy of his wife and child. In some places, that's the only way to survive. Pogo stretched and smiled, sensing an opportunity. Donna frowned. Believe me, Yuri, they're not bluffing. They have more resources than you think and no hesitation. They might even enjoy it. In any case, I think Mr. Ivanovich should start talking. Ivanovich was involved in many things that seemed questionable. Donna began to explain who I was and how I had arrived on the islands, asking me to provide some details. Yuri looked back and forth between Donna and me. What citizenship do you have? When I married Thomas, I was told that I became a citizen of both here and Russia. You're still a Russian citizen. We will file charges for you, but only if you're willing to give a statement about what happened with your husband. He hesitated, thinking. Detective Pyotr Ivanovich, yes, I will. Pyotr? Your maiden name was Volk, right? I noticed a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, but he quickly hid it. I still felt sad about Pyotr, but we had shared so many laughs over the same things that it seemed hard for Yuri to overlook. Donna noticed the twitch and raised her eyebrow. I smiled a little. Yes, Pyotr. I turned to Donna. Volk means wolf in English. So Pyotr and I were Peter and the wolf. Yuri nodded with a quiet chuckle while Donna offered a small smile. It might have been funnier in Russian. We need to clear up some details. I'd like to take the device from here and return it to the right people. Maria agreed. Returning the device is fine. If we didn't, someone would soon ask where it came from, probably a congressman looking for attention. And once word got out that things were escalating, it could create diplomatic issues. Howard spoke up. Greece is preparing the SE Angel with extra fuel tanks to give it a longer range. He can meet one of your ships or submarines wherever you decide, as long as it doesn't go back toward Fiji. We want to avoid any problems there. Yuri seemed to think carefully. Unlike most, he recognized danger for what it really was, not fooled by the appearance when Monster had guided Alexei downstairs. That would be unfortunate and unnecessary. We can have a submarine ready in a couple of days. There's also the delivery point in Sudan, which seems to be a common concern for both our countries. Although we still don't know the target or where this all began, unless Gregor Ivanovich has any information. The wolves ran through the night, moving quietly into the forest, a growing group of wolves in all forms. The ogre army never stood a real chance. The silent wolves jumped from the shadows and overwhelmed them until none were left. Only the Troll King remained, sitting alone on his throne, when the golden wolf, once a dog, came to him. She stood before him and announced his fate, turning him over to the red wolves of his own land to live in darkness forever. In the weeks that followed, strange and worrying things began to happen. Warehouses caught fire in Moldova, and police were active all over Europe. Quiet and determined agents from the FBI and FSB worked together, following leads without rest. In Sudan, a camp used for training was taken apart. 2 groups of men in different uniforms did the job, leaving no one behind. Pogo and Howard laughed about it for hours, noting that some men wore Chinese uniforms while others wore Taiwanese ones. Even Donna and Yuri sometimes misunderstood each other slightly, or maybe they did not misunderstand at all. Zasha Knight, who used to be Zasha Sandoval and before that Zasha Ivanovich, traveled to cold Russia. She was escorted respectfully to a country house by several important members of the Russian Federal Security Service, the FSB. When we arrived, the door to the mansion stood open, inviting us as we walked through the fresh snow. A single light brightened a room at the end of the hall. Gregor Ivanovich sat straight at his desk, watching us with his hands laid out before him. Spooky and several serious officers stood beside him, seeming to split their attention between Gregor and Spooky. Both Yuri and Donna wanted to make sure that Gregor would be taken alive, as there was a chance that some powerful people in the government might be involved. There were still too many questions left unanswered. An empty chair faced him across the desk. I sat down and pushed the fur-lined hood of my red cloak back. His eyes widened in surprise, and I noticed Spooky's knowing smile. "Uncle Gregor, Zasha, Shh." I quieted him. The girl who had married Pyotr would never have said that. "You hurt my Pyotr, your own nephew. You didn't let us be happy. You thought I was too weak to matter. You enjoyed making my life difficult while pretending to be fair." I paused and looked at the frail man before me. "We didn't talk much, so I never told you this. My great-grandfather was from Siberia. I may not look it, but he truly was. I was his favorite. He shared stories with me about tigers, bears, and wolves. I glanced at my gloves and realized that living in the warmth had made me soft, unaccustomed to the cold winter that used to not bother me. He told me that hunting wolves is the most challenging. There are rules for hunting wolves. For every wolf you see, there are many more hidden in the shadows. So it's not just the wolf you see that you should worry about. Wolves are relentless hunters, and while you chase them, they will chase you right back." As I spoke, my anger faded and a sense of calm filled me. "You sent me out into a world full of wolves, but I learned how to survive." I stood up suddenly, feeling that I was finished with this, finished with Gregor. I wanted to leave him behind. I longed to be in the sunshine, to just be Angel, with Thomas and my daughters. I waved to my friends. Yuri stood next to me, as tough and cold as the winter. Even he was shocked by how far Gregor had betrayed us. I had more to say. I thought about this for years, but now I see it doesn't matter. You don't matter to me anymore. These men have many questions for you about your actions and other serious things. I paused to let that sink in. I believe you will be answering them for a long time. As I turned to leave with Spooky by my side, I heard the distant sounds of wolves circling around the Troll King. Chapter The Shack, Necessary Evil in. My life, favors mean a lot. They can be hard to pay back or simple, but often they cost more than just time or money. They can take small pieces of who you are. This is why Trace and I were at the symphony in a cozy box seat. He looked sharp in his tuxedo, tall and thin, with his gray hair standing out against his nearly black skin. He looked so good that nobody seemed surprised to see him with someone like me. It's a bit different, but less so these days. Some might wonder why he's with someone as plain as me. Trace runs the technical side of Cumulus, which means he works for me since I'm the director. Cumulus is mainly about secret watching with 2 parts. Green is the standard military program with highly trained operatives. Red is the other side, where we take in people who feel lost or desperate. We work with those who have no idea who we are or what they're doing. I've tried to keep his work far from my own because we've been friends for almost 20 years, long before Cumulus had a name. Trace and I will stay close until one of us is gone. We both realize this but don't want traditional ties. I've always put my work first, and even though I care for him, he still remembers his wife. He wears his wedding ring, which shows that love can last even after someone is gone. The memory of that time is still painful for him. He was driving home with Josephine after a celebration for her pregnancy, having had a bit too much to drink. His car crossed into oncoming traffic. She died instantly, and he came away unharmed. Back then, the laws for drunk driving were less strict, so he just got a suspended license and faced a lonely life. Soon, he was filled with regrets. Of course, he faced more tough times later. Trace was one of the first in a new program that would turn into Cumulus Red. I was the young Army counterintelligence agent assigned to help him, definitely not the most experienced, even if I sometimes pretended to be. The first rule of handling someone like him is, don't get emotionally involved. It's taught so much that it should probably be written somewhere for everyone to see. I'm not sure if it would have made a difference, but maybe. He was a complete mess when I took him in. He had been living on the streets for over a year, despite holding a degree in electronic engineering from Caltech. He looked terrible, was deeply unhappy, and was hard to be around. His mind was slipping. He often talked to himself and seemed to answer back. I could tell he didn't have much time left before he would no longer be able to help us. It made sense to just let him go, to let him wander away. Any strange tales he could share about his past would probably be seen as the ramblings of a man losing his grip on reality. But then I saw him asleep one night, and I heard him talking to someone named Josephine, pleading with her not to leave him again. He was stuck in his own awful memories. For months, I kept my distance, trying to stay emotionally out of it. It was hard for me. Watching a good man fall apart due to his struggles with addiction was much tougher than I had imagined. We spent a lot of time together, and his pain was clear. What made it even more complicated was that he wasn't acting out of betrayal or seeking revenge like I had been trained to deal with. He just wanted the hurt to stop. I could almost hear Josephine's voice in my head, urging him to stop harming himself. It bothered me every single day. Her voice became harder to ignore. He missed an important meeting to check a computer we had taken temporarily. Even in his confused state, he was still our best option. We had to return the computer without looking at it, which made me really angry. I went straight to the old factory where he was staying and rushed down the rusty stairs. I found him passed out, likely alive only because a pizza box was keeping his face from sinking into a mix of food and drink. I had reached my limit. Without thinking, I checked his pockets and threw away all his substances. I locked him in the bathroom and kept him there for a few months. It was a choice that almost cost him everything. I knew it would be tough, but I thought he would be better off facing the truth rather than staying in his current state. It wasn't my place to make that call, but I did it anyway. I often take on the responsibilities others can't handle. He experienced many serious issues like confusion, fever, and shaking. He cried out and shouted as though he was fighting an inner battle. In any other place, someone would have likely called for help. In a more religious setting, they might have called for an exorcist. In this place, people looked down at the cracked sidewalk, tightened their coats, and walked a bit faster. He would lie in a dirty corner until I came by with buckets of cold water to clean him up. Sometimes I had to call in a doctor who was working without proper approval due to past mistakes. That doctor never asked questions because, even early on, he understood that being curious could get him into trouble. I changed from being Donna to something he muttered in anger as he huddled in the shadows, tears rolling down his face. Then, he really began to feel hate. Day by day, I saw it grow until it became stronger than his need for a drink. When his hate was so deep that he wouldn't even ask me for a drink, I knew something had changed. For a long time, he answered me with one-word responses. Eventually, he stopped talking altogether and just stared at me, silently planning revenge in his mind for when he got the chance. I waited a couple more weeks, then brought whiskey and a backpack to see him. I set the whiskey down in front of him and moved behind him, pulling out a small, unregistered weapon. It wasn't very strong, but it was enough for what I intended to do. Go ahead. Take a drink, I said. He gazed at the bottle on the uneven tiles in front of him. Why? I'm done. If you want to end it, do it. Just know it's your last chance. I pointed the weapon at him. Make it a long one. I can either leave you here or... He slowly looked back at me, the barrel almost touching his eye. Just another person lost? Yeah, it happens all the time. No one will care to know who you were. It'll be quick. He turned to the bottle, then slowly reached to pick it up. A wave of sadness hit me, but I had made my choice. He undid the cap slowly. He moved carefully, without a word, then tipped the bottle over the drain, watching the golden liquid disappear. You really are a bitter person, I said. Yeah, I know. What if I make a mistake? Then you deal with the consequences. He understood I meant it. His anger was clear. I took out some clothes and soap from my backpack, then unlocked the cuff I had put on him, noting the marks it had left. They would heal, but the memories would stay. Clean yourself up and get dressed. We're going to get something to eat and find you a place to stay. There's an old hotel nearby, and it even has heat. He nodded, his growing frustration clear in his eyes. That frustration was always there, like a storm brewing in the distance. I noticed him watching me from time to time, as if he was waiting for just the right moment. I could feel that he was ready to respond. It was like a race. I braced myself for the time when I would need to take charge. His sadness and regret over Josephine's passing would never go away. I promised myself I would act quickly. We worked together for 2 more years, more than with anyone else. The nature of our work required it, always busy and ongoing. This meant he understood our goals well. Still, we hardly spoke, only discussing what needed to be done. He learned a lot, and we began trusting him with the van, where he worked efficiently. He kept things organized, making it harder to tell who was just a helper and who was a professional. He suggested opening a small electronics repair shop in a tough neighborhood. There were rumors that it was connected to crime, which worked for us. People usually stayed away from places they thought might be linked to something shady. His frustration never went away. He was always professional, almost too cool. But the message was clear. If you let your guard down, there would be consequences. This pushed me to hone my skills even more, reminding me of how important it was to stay focused. Eventually, I passed him to my replacement when I was promoted to a higher position. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. I could finally relax without worrying about being betrayed by someone I worked closely with. Letting your guard down can have serious results, like health issues. That's what happens. Serious health problems. You know those difficult medical exams that women need to go through? They are necessary. Fortunately, my chances of recovery were good because we caught my condition early. For someone like me, the choice was easy. I decided to go through with the surgery. Since I never planned to start a family, it made sense to remove what wasn't needed. Almost a year after getting a new doctor, I had the operation and then returned home. I should have reached out to my mom or Pogo. They would have come to help me. I don't know why I didn't. I told the hospital staff that I had someone looking after me. Instead, I quietly left in a taxi to avoid staying another day at the hospital. I took more pain medicine than I was supposed to and went to sleep. When I opened my eyes, Trace was sitting in a chair next to my bed. He was looking at me, his face hard to read. I barely remembered securing my belongings before going in for the operation. I was too confused to think clearly when I got home. On a normal day, I might have felt sure about dealing with him. He was much bigger than me, but I had been trained to fight while he had not. It wasn't certain I would win, but I would have had a fair chance, but not now. Good morning, Trace. You look unwell. I feel unwell. He looked at me closely. You trusted us with someone who isn't experienced. I winced as I tried to sit up. He just needs time to improve. He's had enough time. He isn't listening and isn't learning. He'll make mistakes. He turned a whole team away from an assignment. It's like putting on a show. He doesn't trust us to manage things. I'll talk to the supervisor. We don't need more people if they just get in the way. He nodded thoughtfully. We need a real expert. Someone who knows what they are doing, not just following orders. We sat quietly for what felt like a long time. Finally, I spoke up. I was surprised to see you. I thought you might be. It took me a while to find your place and the right time to come. I thought maybe you were here for another reason. I can't deny that I thought about it. I watched you rest for a while, thinking about my options. The fireplace tool? I had to create a reason for anyone to think there was a disturbance. Oh. Had to make it believable. That makes sense. But you were just doing your job, dealing with the issue. I couldn't look at him. The medicine was making my thoughts fuzzy. Yes, that's it. He seemed to pick up on something deeper. A look of concern crossed his face. Why? I shook my head and looked away. I couldn't bring myself to answer. The painkillers had me feeling lost. But you'd still be upset if I had a drink. In a heartbeat. Anger sparked in my words. Why? What do you think Josephine would want? Would she want you to suffer slowly, or would she prefer it to be quick? He sank back in his chair, looking tired. Oh, dear. He let out a quiet breath. You made me feel resentful. It worked, didn't it? There wasn't much more to say, and he went silent. We stayed in a strangely comfortable quiet. He even helped me to the bathroom and back to bed before leaving. I thought about reporting my situation. My home felt vulnerable, but I knew it wasn't dangerous. He had his chance and didn't act. Now he understood more than I meant to share. He checked on me almost every day as I got better, shaking his head in disbelief each time he left. We talked a little, mostly about small things, but most of the time we just sat quietly, watching the gas fire, each lost in our own thoughts. I told the director about the agent who had replaced me. He hadn't adjusted well to the kind of cases we handled, so it was easy to convince him to take a more regular job. A different agent took his place. A few days later, I found an unsigned thank you card in my mailbox. Trace became a close friend. He figured out who we were or got pretty close. He proved he could be trusted time and time again, and soon he was fully part of my life. He never really stopped coming around. We never talked about it. It just happened. It took a couple more years for our relationship to grow. It wasn't fate. His previous love story had ended, and I never thought of it that way. But we understood each other perfectly, and in our lives, that meant more than just liking each other. Spending time together felt good, and having someone to share moments with, someone who wouldn't judge me, was much more important. He never put me down, but he often helped me make better choices. He reminded me to keep my promise that I would step in if he ever drank again. I promised him I would, because I do what needs to be done, things that others avoid. So nearly 20 years later, we sat together in a box seat, Trace's hand lightly resting on my arm. We were waiting for Maria Hawthorne, the deputy director at the FBI. I smiled when she arrived. Her security team took positions outside the door to the box, right across from two of my Dobermans. A dozen more of my dogs were around the building. I wanted Maria to notice them. We both chose similar black dresses. Hers was a bit longer than mine since she was taller. Her escort, Michael, brought her in and sat her next to me. Then he took a seat on the other side of her. I knew this was a bit unusual, but it felt necessary. He whispered something to her, then she turned to me. You're making my team a little uneasy. They're puzzled by the many people you have here. Because this is unusual, Maria, and my team doesn't like surprises unless we're the ones causing them. You could have come to my office. We've worked together before. This has to be completely off the record, Donna. Now I was really interested. Why is that? Because I've lost 4 agents and can't handle it officially. 4 agents, I can't let this go. There must be accountability and people need to know. Why me? You must know others who are easier to deal with. Because you have the skills. And you care. You remember Morton Gallagher? My jaw tightened as she continued. A few years back, people with troubled pasts were killed in and around a hotel room booked in his name with a stolen credit card. The money trail went cold, but I'm sure you helped pay for their burials. Even if they were, I believe Mr. Gallagher passed away from an unfortunate event. We looked into that too. There's no clear proof, but the hotel security cameras where he was found were out of order for about an hour around the time he passed away. One of your contacts, I assume? Trust me, if it was, you wouldn't want to meet her. If Spooky learned the FBI was searching for her, she'd probably be going through Hawthorne's office and home in no time. There would be little I could do to stop her, even if I wanted to. Maria frowned a bit as her curiosity clashed with her better judgment. I'm not asking you to give them to me. So, what are you asking for? The group he was part of is secret. They work with banned technologies, like harmful chemicals and nuclear systems. I understand. She hesitated, unsure of how to move forward. She disliked feeling uncertain, and I could see that. Our government found one of their key locations. Instead of taking it apart piece by piece, you could disrupt their activities here for a while. That was what we had been searching for before the troubling Tommy Amber incident. So make an agreement with local law enforcement and close them down. That's what we were trying to do when my team got captured. Local law enforcement is involved, and the DOJ told me to avoid any trouble. Where is it located? In the tri-border area. That meant Argentina, if anyone was paying attention. The tri-border of Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay was tricky at the best of times. Accusations of wrongdoing were common, while local leaders insisted everything was exaggerated. What's the situation there? A small 2-acre site, 3 buildings, about 25 guards, and 12 of their staff. There are also a few local women, maybe 6. I felt a pang of sympathy thinking of those who struggled with limited options in their lives. Like Amber, like me. We shared that feeling. If you want to make a change, you need witnesses, so the women should be unharmed. She nodded, looking relieved to keep a part of her values. Michael gave her a small envelope to pass to me. I handed it over to Trace without really looking at it. My jacket had pockets, and like hers, my bag was filled with things I hoped I wouldn't need. Everything we know about the group and the location is on the data stick. It also explains why I'm being told to step back. Is someone higher up involved? We don't believe so. Not this time. It's misguided, but not involved. The order to step back came from the State Department. They're trying to set up a sharing agreement for law enforcement information. She shook her head, frustrated with the slow-moving bureaucracy. Another ineffective deal. They just don't trust us there. We've earned some of that distrust over the years. She frowned a bit at that. FBI agents often see themselves as heroes and dislike being viewed as the bad guys. I try to be more honest with myself. I see what I do as simply taking care of business, even when it's tough. Maria understood this and accepted the way things really are. In South America, people often look at the U.S. with doubt. Past events have made them cautious about our help. Even when we mean well, they see us as too big and too involved. Working together on sensitive issues, like stopping dangerous materials from being traded nearby, is often seen as giving in to the U.S. Maria recognized this truth. No matter what, we need to act. If we don't respond to this, it could endanger every FBI agent, DEA worker, NGO staff member, and embassy employee here, including you. I thought about arguing that my team had strengths, but she already knew that. That was why she was here. It made sense. After all, I did what had to be done. It took 6 weeks to organize everything. The electronic file Maria gave me was detailed and clearly pointed out the government official we needed to convince. Argentina had a rocky relationship with the U.S., and at least one official was using that as an excuse to avoid helping while also benefiting from illegal payments. It didn't take long for Spooky to find him and learn what made him vulnerable. Maria came into my office but kept the door open, dressed in a light gray jacket and skirt. Some of my team think she wears similar suits as a way to tease me. I know it means something different, though, even if she hasn't said it. When she started wearing those suits, it marked her growth from someone new and useful to a professional I could trust with tough tasks. Someone who could think for herself and act, rather than just react. The suit didn't bother me, but then Candy, my secretary, walked in behind her and leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, a playful smile on her face, very different from her usual serious nature. Candy looked focused, sharp like Spooky, and I hoped that intensity wouldn't spread to me. Maria placed a file on my desk and made room for Candy to see it. Comisario Mayor Matias Acosta. He's the one who shared the information about the FBI agents and where they were. From what we heard through the devices I set up, I don't think he knew they were in danger at first. But once they were, he tried to cover it up to hide his own part in this. You've talked to him? I asked. Not yet. He has strong security around him. It isn't perfect, but I didn't want to raise any alarms. It's probably better to do everything at once. She smiled slightly and glanced back at Candy. He's set for visits in the tri-border area in 3 weeks. He likes to go out after work and often stops by the local bars. He enjoys meeting friendly people. Candy's smile grew, showing her determination. She had a personal interest in this and was clearly eager to help. Normally, I might have hesitated because of her involvement, but Candy was always dependable. She had been one of the best team members we'd had before joining us full-time. Her skill in connecting with others was impressive. If anyone could keep their work and personal feelings apart, it was her. She had even shared some tips with Spooky, showing her how to catch someone's attention and handle social situations better. Spooky sometimes used those tricks on her missions to gain access to places, but she struggled with connecting to people as well as Candy did. "I assume you two have a plan," I said, wanting to cut off any elaborate details. "Just give me a timeline and some main points." Candy stood a bit taller. "It's all in the packet." I held back a smile. The packet looked well prepared. "I'll let you know if I need anything more." Spooky slipped out, and Candy closed the door behind her. I realized I needed to keep a closer watch on those two. Just a glance at the packet told me they could be a powerful team, but who could I use? I nodded to the sergeant, giving my go-ahead. Of course, they were all sergeants, mostly staff sergeants. In another place, they'd have their own teams or units. Staff sergeants were ideal for me. They had experience, but still enough energy. The sergeant was actually a master sergeant. Leading 40 men in an infantry group would usually be a step back for him, not this time, especially not for me. He tapped his microphone. "Mockingbird, Mockingbird, this is Hellhound." A calm woman's voice replied, "Hellhound, this is Mockingbird." She took a brief pause, settling into her role. "Mockingbird on station." I smiled slightly at the inclusion of a woman in this mission. It was a big change from previous times. The sergeant smiled confidently. "Mockingbird, Mockingbird, please provide your status." My Air Force Tech Sergeant, part of my technical team, observed a row of lights turn red on her handheld device as the EA-6B Prowler above us started its operations. She gave me a silent thumbs up and nodded sharply once. I imagined if she were in her Air Force uniform, her hair would be neatly tied back. Another woman. We really are everywhere. "Watch out, guys." I looked at my Dobermans crouched along the trail. They were focused on the sergeant instead of me. Normally, I would be their main concern, but right now they just watched him. They were alert, ready to start, and waiting for the excitement. All the earlier talk about sports or video games had stopped. The usual importance of everyday life was put aside for the moment, if there was a moment to come. They aren't like Pogo and his team. My boys are part of the infantry. If you want a precise mission with minimal fuss, the Special Forces are best for that. SEALs, Delta, and others. But when you need to make a statement, nothing beats the infantry. They excel at their jobs and get results. It's what they do. Sometimes the Special Forces seem a bit too polished and some people don't understand that level of detail. I have my own way of seeing things. Air Force strikes can seem overly technical, almost like a natural disaster. People can explain those outcomes to themselves. Sometimes you need to leave a mark, and the infantry does that better than anyone. In their formal gear, you would see numerous badges and tabs showing their training, but that's not why they're chosen. They've been picked from the best light infantry units. That has become an important task for the infantry branch managers. Finding the best has become a respected mission for them. They are quick thinkers and experienced. By nature, they are agile and very determined, the true spirit of light infantry. They can move quickly and adjust to tough situations. They might lack the polish of the Special Forces, but that's exactly why I appreciate them. Getting them assigned was tough, and I grew tired of the red tape, so I had some strong talks with a few key people to make it happen. Sometimes people need a nudge to do the right thing, and it served as a helpful lesson for some. True integrity means doing the right thing even when no one is watching. After all, it's the right choice. And sometimes, someone really is watching. Usually that's me. Officially, they work for the Army Testing and Evaluation Command, testing new combat technologies. We do have those. In their special roles, they are part of a protection team, trained for unique jobs. Often, they do this work for me. Their similarities and energetic personalities made people fondly refer to them as Donna's Dobermans. The main reason my Dobermans are here is that when something feels off, you need to act quickly. The sergeant and his team checked their radios. If Mockingbird was doing her job well above, There was a brief moment of silence in the background noise where their radios worked. It wasn't a big deal because they mostly used hand signals. They weren't in their usual uniforms. They wore Russian airborne outfits and caps instead. All their gear was either Russian or European. They carried AK-74 rifles, SV-98 sniper rifles, and PKP machine guns. Each piece had been carefully improved by the experts at a secure facility. Even the bullets were specially made. My Doberman's counterparts in Russia usually wear American uniforms and use American gear. It's a bit of an ongoing joke in our field. It's what humor looks like here in tough situations. The sergeant looked them over one last time and gave his usual reminder. Stay alert and keep an eye out. He glanced at me, a confident smile on his face. On your call, ma'am. I paused for a moment, feeling the charged atmosphere. Go. He made a hand signal and 2 lines of men moved silently along the path, speeding off seamlessly. The sniper teams had already advanced to keep an eye on the target, watching for any signs of trouble. I saw them fade into the greenery with my Air Force tech sergeant, and then turned to walk back up the path to the gravel road to wait for my ride. Technically, I was supposed to have 4 of them stay with me for protection, but I didn't want to hold them back. Plus, this wouldn't take long. As I walked back to the road, I heard the sound of single rifle shots. It had to be the snipers. Then came the sound of assault rifles in bursts, mixed with the deeper sounds from the machine guns as the main force moved into the compound. I heard a couple of soft thuds that I guessed were charges to help them get through walls. At least they were sticking to the plan, which they usually did. Good infantry likes to make their own entrances when possible. It's safer that way. Once they're moving, I don't worry about them. It's too late for that. Besides, there's not much they can't handle. I noticed a black SUV pull up along the road, coming to a stop behind a couple of flashy tour buses. 2 men appeared to be changing a tire on one of the buses. Trace got out of the SUV and walked around to open the passenger door for me. He and I listened to some distant noises and looked at our watches. Then he passed me a cold can of soda from the cooler. We should wait a little longer, he said. I nodded and took a sip. It was really cold. Anything going on? I asked. He smiled a bit and shook his head. No, everything went as planned. He let his security leave when he met her. I glanced into the back seat where a man sat quietly with Spooky and a satisfied-looking Candy beside him. There was no doubt she would be able to handle things. During the short drive to the compound, Candy, Spooky, and Trace chatted happily. Commissario Mayor Matias Acosta spoke English well, and I wanted him to get the message we were sending, but knowing something and proving it are different. That's why we had Russian equipment. We wanted to avoid any misunderstandings and teach a lesson. When we arrived, 2 of my Dobermans opened the main gate for us. The guards had likely warned them we were coming. The confrontation had lasted less than 15 minutes, mostly spent cleaning up. Some soldiers were moving bodies into the courtyard and stacking them. Others collected items for review, computers and documents. Some were kept for later, while others were disposed of. A small group of frightened people huddled in a corner of the main compound, trying to shield some children despite their own fear. The sergeant approached, still looking around cautiously. There are no losses on our side. All targets are dealt with. The one you wanted alive is in custody. He resisted a bit, so I don't know how long he'll last. He frowned, but didn't apologize. His priority was his team, as it should be. The civilian count is 8 women and 4 children. They are all fine. We heard some soft thuds from somewhere below us. He smiled. Quarter block C4 charges are on a timer, flushing them into the septic system. I couldn't help but smile at that. The team was thorough. We were making a point. How much longer do you need? 10 more minutes. We're getting rid of the vehicles except for 1 truck. He pointed towards the group of women, who flinched at his gesture. I'm not sure if they can drive it. They'll manage, I replied, looking back towards the SUV. I explained my plan and turned back to let him get back to work. After a few minutes, I signaled to Trace, who had Spooky and Candy bring our captive out of the SUV and walk him over. I nodded to Candy and she took off his hood. Mr. Acosta, I hope your ride over was interesting? He looked around in surprise, and his eyes widened as he realized where we were. His eyes shifted from the flames rising from the buildings to the soldiers pouring fuel over what was left of the scene. He stopped looking around, focusing on Spooky with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Please listen, Matthias. I don't want to have to repeat myself. Do you understand?" He diverted his gaze from her and managed to look at me. He opened his mouth to speak, but I interrupted him. "These people ended the lives of 4 American agents, and you played a part in it." He began to shake his head and object. "Please let me finish, Matthias. This isn't up for discussion. I just need to be clear." I glanced up and noticed Trace nodding sadly before walking over to the SUV, deliberately looking away. He understood what needed to happen, and he agreed, but he didn't want to witness it. I didn't blame him. But I was the one who had to see this through. I pointed so he could see the sergeant and one of his men supporting a man on his knees next to the pile of bodies. He looked pale and weak, and I wondered if he would last long enough to see this through. Not that it really mattered. "That man, the one you made a deal with, is Aldrich Cunningham. He deals in illegal arms. He's worth about 45 million euros. The money he offered you for the information that led to those agents' deaths and for the help you gave him afterward is small compared to what he might lose. He has connections all over Europe and would likely escape punishment for what he's done. Even if he ever faced a trial, he could hire the best lawyers to defend him." I walked closer to the kneeling man, hearing Acosta stumble behind me, being led by Spooky and Candy. I looked at Acosta as I pulled out my vintage Beretta and aimed it firmly. And none of that matters to me. The sound of the Beretta was sharp in the quiet, standing out against the noise of the scene. A moment of silence settled before one of the women started crying. The others rushed to comfort her, instinctively trying to help and take attention away. I moved over to Acosta as the sergeant and his man moved the man away. Acosta looked at me with wide eyes. It was clear that only Spooky and Candy kept him steady. "Commissario Mayor Matthias Acosta, you will do the right thing from now on. You will not take money from people like this. I'm not asking you to betray your country. You will be a loyal Argentinian police officer. You will not be corrupt. You do not want me to return. Do you understand?" He nodded, unable to speak. That was all right. He kept glancing back and forth between me and Spooky. I turned to watch as flames began to spread over the pile of bodies from a road flare that one of the soldiers had dropped. I waved for Spooky to join me with the women. A few stood firm and positioned themselves between us and the others. They were brave and deserved better than what life had given them. I handed Spooky the keys to the last truck and the handcuffs. "Give them the keys," I said. "Tell them to wait an hour after we leave, then drive into town." They could only take the handcuffs off Acosta there, but they should not treat him badly. Let them know this is not about them. And make sure Mr. Acosta understands that I would be very unhappy if anything happened to these women. Candy led Acosta over to them while I walked back to the SUV where Trace and my tech sergeant were loading their things into the trunk. When the snipers signaled that everything was clear, we left. I glanced back at the compound as we drove away and saw the last soldier, the sergeant, slip out through one of the damaged walls. During our short drive to the buses, I needed to ask Spooky what she had done to our captive since he seemed to be focused on her much of the time. "I showed him some family pictures," she explained. "I took them the last time I was here." She handed me a small tablet with the pictures ready to view. Acosta's wife, his son, his daughters, and even a picture of him were there, all sound asleep in their beds, each with a small item next to them. Candy smiled softly. "They're cute kids. They really were sweet. Even Spooky softened a bit as she looked at them. Spooky and kids? That was an interesting thought. Strange things do happen, I guess. Trace appeared more comfortable with the pictures than I expected, probably because he believes that despite Spooky's tough exterior, she has limits. They have a connection that comes from sharing hard experiences together. Spooky treats him with respect, always calling him Mr. Jackson, but for reasons only they seem to understand. I've never asked. By the time our 2 tourist buses reached a quiet airfield, it was clear that Matthias Acosta had not raised any alarms. I didn't really expect him to. Another concert. During the break, Trace picked up 2 drinks from one of the tables, 1 water and 1 champagne. He carefully handed me the champagne. I usually avoid drinking in front of him, but sometimes he does this. It's a ritual, a reminder of our agreement and the bond we share. It reminds us that he relies on me to keep him steady, and I rely on him to hold on to my part of humanity amidst everything we have to handle. The weight of the Beretta I carried always feels heavier when he does this. Maria would have to learn about the mission's outcome through the news and regular intelligence reports. We would not risk another meeting over this. It wasn't hard for her. A helpful Argentinian police chief allowed full access to a small compound that had seen much destruction when clues linked the men inside to the unsolved case of 4 FBI agents. Matias Acosta is known for being very focused on family these days and even brings his family along on work trips. He clearly doesn't like being away from them. He is quickly becoming known for his honesty. There's a story going around that when he was recently offered a bribe, he showed his strong sense of integrity by saying he would not compromise his values, stating he would rather face tough consequences than accept a single peso. Having integrity is important. The official report on the compound suggests it faced issues from a rival group in the same line of work. Of course, everyone has their own understanding of what really happened. Someone is out there ready to take action. They will do whatever is necessary. Hey, listeners! If you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.